Now, greetings to those who are on the live stream. You're welcome to our little service here. It's good to have you, and I'm just going to make sure that Chris and the Avondale people know that I'm now speaking. They're tuning in as part of their service. Speaking now. There we go. Hopefully, Chris, if you're tuned in, you can send me a text. Well, I want to speak to you about Henry Williams, and I couldn't think of, it's that, it's not alliteration, isn't it? It's alliteration when you do the consonants, not rather than vowels. That's assonance. So, dope or duper. Henry Williams and the treaty, dope or duper. That is to say, is he a dope, incompetent, someone when he translated the treaty into Maori, was not up to the job. He didn't understand constitutional law, and he didn't have a good grasp of the Maori language. He was a dope and did a bad job. Is that the case? Or is he a duper? That is, someone who deceives, misleads, maybe for benign reasons, maybe for malevolent reasons, self-interest. But when he interpreted that treaty to Maori, did he mislead them so that when they signed something that they couldn't possibly have agreed to? So Henry Williams and the treaty, dope or duper? The reason why this becomes such a crucial issue is because Henry Williams is really the glue that binds the English version of the Treaty of Waitangi together to the Maori translation of it, the Maori text of the treaty. In a sense, Henry Williams is the one that glues it together as the translator and as the interpreter. And so consequently, those who have issues with the wording or the outcomes of the treaty, if they want to say, well, we hold to the treaty, but just not as we have received it, they need to handle Henry Williams. What did he think he was doing? And was he competent or was he misleading? Was he a deceiver? And that is why Henry Williams, down through the ages, not just recently, but even more so in his own day, was attacked. His character was attacked. In fact, I think if some of the settlers had their way after the Northern War in 1845, they were quite happy for the Maori protagonists to be at peace, but those, without mentioning his names, those who aided and abetted them and gave them information and encouraged them, they should have the full weight of the law, which, of course, for treason is to be hung. There were those who would have hung Henry Williams in the 1840s, and his detractors still carry on today as well. Now, I am having a very modest aim this morning. I just want us to ask, well, what did Henry Williams think he was doing? And what did he understand by the treaty? And what was it that he was trying to explain to Maori? Now, we may agree or disagree with that, but I think it's good to hear his voice. Because I think in these whole kind of treaty debates that we're having, and no doubt we'll have more of them up to 2040. I don't think I have to be a prophet to predict that. It's not that one person has the answer. And listen to me, I have the right interpretation of the treaty and how things should go forward and such like. It's actually, I'm far too conservative for that, to feel that what New Zealand needs is some sort of messiah, even if it is a historian or myself. What we need, a conservative view of society is that you must listen to all voices. The art of compromise is not just pragmatism, it's actually saying that the truth is not held by one person. You must listen to different voices. And I think that as much, the rhetoric seems to go and the cancellation is building and such like. But actually, we need to hear all voices. Julian Batchelor and whoever it might be. I'm just thinking of someone who might have been cancelled in the conversation. And I think you hear their voice to say, to what extent is it what they're saying true and helpful? And Henry Williams is one of those voices. And this is, I think, the role of historians and of church historians to allow a voice from the past to speak today. Now, that voice from the past speaks in his context. Well, Henry Williams speaks in his context, which becomes difficult to understand, and different historians will take different views. But it's still a voice. And I think it's helpful that as we are thinking in our generation what we are to do, to realise that there are many voices in the past who can help us. Now, for my own position, I've been very impressed by Sir Aparana Ngata, a good Anglican Maori, and the way he gave leadership to New Zealand in the first part of the 20th century. And I actually think that's still a very helpful way forward. And I think also is very consonant with the voice of Henry Williams. So having said that as an introduction, let's now turn to Henry Williams himself. The first point that I want to make and emphasise is the character of Henry Williams. Those who are wanting to dismiss him or slander him have to deal with a man of impeccable character, whatever people might say about him. Now, he was born in 1792. So if you are quick at doing maths, you can do 1840 minus 1792, and you come up with bit of brain gym first thing Sunday morning. 48. I heard someone say 48. 48 years old at the time. So he was, he was still a young man, wasn't he? But he, born in 1792, but he joined the Royal Navy in 1806 when he was 14. And that was the year after the Battle of Trafalgar with Nelson against the French fleet. And he served in there. He actually had, I can think of 3, if not 4, major battles, sea battles that he was involved with. Particularly one major one when he was serving on the Galatea, and where he was, along with 200 of his crew, were wounded, and he carried that wound with him the rest of his life. And he rose to the level of lieutenant, which is just below becoming a captain of your own boat. But in 1814, there were far too many lieutenants around, and at the end of the war, he was pensioned off on half pay at the age of 23. There we go. So he took early retirement. Well, he felt that his life wasn't really over at 23, although he had faced death on a number of occasions. So he offered himself to the CMS in 1819 with the attitude of, I'll just go to the hardest place you've got. And they said, well, that's New Zealand. I think initially he was going to sail a boat out to New Zealand for them, to be the sea captain, take the boat out. But they then changed their mind. He got ordained, studied for the ministry, ordained, and he married Mary Ann Williams, who, marrying somebody, the prospect of marrying somebody who's travelling 5 months to the other side of the world, it shows you how much faith that Mary Ann. And Henry Williams said, actually, I don't go with a wife, I go with a mission partner in the ministry. And that was actually proved true. Both Henry and Mary Ann served together, and particularly at Paihia, and all their lives. They arrived in August 1823. So that's 17 years before the treaty, or 16 and a half. He was appointed the leader of the CMS mission. And he was known for being a man of his word. Many of his missionary colleagues didn't like the word that he might say, because he came with a sort of a naval discipline. But nevertheless, he was a man of his word, kept his word. He became a trusted peacemaker also between Maori, which started with a conflict that erupted between the Hokianga and the Bay of Islands. And Maori had sophisticated peacemaking mechanisms, but in this case, the key Whaire Rahu, was implicated on both sides, could not be the mediator. When he tried to make peace, they fired muskets at him. And so the Maori leaders of the day were thinking, how do we do this? How do we solve this problem? Let's take this missionary, ask him to be the peacemaker. Well, that gave him a role within Maoridom, which is very distinct. Other missionaries shared it in part, but particularly Henry Williams as the peacemaker between tribes. He baptised the first Maori to be baptised as a convert, Christian Rangi, in 1825. One of the contexts for the treaty, of course, is the Maori conversion to Christianity. It really began as a movement in 1830, when a small group of 3 were baptised, taifanga in their number. But it grew through the 1830s, despite the fact that there was a civil war taking place in the Bay of Islands between Ngāpuhi. But it grew through to 1840 to where perhaps, don't hold me to this, but this is my rough rule of thumb, perhaps 1,500 to 2,000 Maori were baptised in the Bay of Islands, out of a population of perhaps 10 to 12,000 or so. So what's that? About 20% of Maori had been baptised. But of course, to be baptised meant that you knew your catechism, that you had led a life of good conduct, being observed by the Maori catechists who were observing you. And so there were a far wider circle of people who had already come to profess Christianity. And so a much wider movement was starting to take place, and particularly during the 1840s, spread right through the North Island. So just to reiterate that, between 1830 and 1850, my estimations are that some 90 to 95% of Maori came to profess Christianity over that 20-year period. Some 65 to 70,000 Maori. And an amazing move of God. This forms the context for Henry Williams as the head of the mission to be involved with forming this treaty. Now, he preached without fear or favour. This is about him being a man of his word. There were a number of very high chiefs with mana. Hongi Hika was one of them, who led Ngāpuhi in what's often called the Musket Wars. But there were other leaders too, Whare Umu and a man called Te Kohi. These were paramount chiefs who everybody else was in awe of, and their mana was very high. Tohi Tapu, who was by no means a small chief of low standing, who lived nearby Henry Williams and was, in a sense, a patron of the mission, looked after them. He said to them, to Kohi's coming to pay a visit, whatever you do, don't mention the place of fire. Oh, says Henry Williams. Now, the reason why not to mention the place of fire, that is hell, was because it would be taken as an insult by a high-born chief. You know, you might say to it, you might burn a slave, or say a slave's going to burn in hell. It doesn't matter if it's in the afterlife or this life. It's an insult to say that a chief would be burnt with fire. And here, Te Kohi is coming. Tohi Tapu, just this, you know, let's not cause trouble. But Henry Williams realised, actually, there's a problem here, because everybody around Pai here was saying, well, you know, he speaks to us like that, but he'll never speak to someone like Te Kohi like that. So Henry Williams realised it was the freedom to preach the gospel without fear or favour. And so when Te Kohi came, Henry Williams said to him, has anyone told you about the place of fire? No, they haven't. Whereupon he talked about the coming wrath, and that those who don't repent would suffer judgment and eternal fire. Do you know, it's often seen and characterised as a sort of a harsh message, but I personally am convinced that given Maori understanding of utu and such like, that they never would have converted. Well, it would be much more difficult for them to convert without having a good understanding that you can suspend revenge because vengeance belongs to the Lord. he will be the judge. And it's because of their doctrine of hell that people like Ngā the father of Tarore, the girl who was killed, for instance, in the Waikato, was able to forgive his enemies. And so it's actually an important part of the gospel that we're losing in our day because we don't preach it without fear or favour. Te Kohi turned to Tohi Tapu and said, "Does he always speak like this?" And Tohi Tapu said, "Yes." Everything was very polite. But 4 weeks later, Te Kohi comes back with 200 warriors in order to get Utu, to plunder Pai here, to avenge the insult. And I've got, if I can find a little bit of paper. Te Kohi thought he'd have it all his own way, but actually people from Waitangi realised that he was coming. So they came up and just sat quietly over there to say, "What do you think you might do? Because we're watching you, and if you do things that we don't like, we're going to attack you." So it was a bit of a standoff. Te Kohi makes his speech as his take. He was seeking Utu for the insult. This is Henry Williams writing in his journal. But actually, Henry Williams responds by laughing at him. And now you can imagine, chiefs knew how to put the fear of God in people, or the fear of the atua in people. Henry Williams laughs at him, which apparently threw the chief off balance. Henry Williams declared that his words were but delivered by us in love. He had come to make peace. Te Kohi said he had come to make peace and wanted a gift, and Henry Williams declined to give it to him. Whereas now I consider, by not giving it to it, Henry Williams says, I consider that we have gained a victory. But Te Kohi was enraged, and everyone around was amazed at the missionary defiance. And now that's quite an elaborate story. It's quite an amusing story in some ways. And it ended in a good meal of stir-about. And everything was settled. And Te Kohi returned in the afternoon with baskets of potatoes and as a peace offering to the missionaries. So the point I'm making is about Henry Williams' character. He was a man of his word. He said things without fear or favour. And he was calm in the face of conflict. And I think that's the context. If people are wanting to criticise Henry Williams, you must deal with his character. Well, secondly, Henry Williams as a translator. Well, in 1840, Henry Williams had just returned from delivering Octavius Hadfield down to the Kapiti coast, where Te Rauparaha's son and nephew had invited a missionary to come, and he had delivered him there and then walked back overland right through the middle of the North Island and returned to the Bay of Islands, only a few days before Hobson's boat arrived into the Bay of Islands. Now, Henry Williams was staying at Waimate, or Waimate North, as us South Islanders like to call it, and but it just shows you that Henry Williams wasn't just had a knowledge of the Bay of Islands, he actually had an extensive knowledge of the whole country. He had stayed with these chiefs. He had shared hospitality with them. He had conversed with them. He was known to them, which is one of the reasons why when the treaty went round the country, isn't it surprising how quickly it was signed by chiefs who weren't up in the Bay of Islands? Now, we don't know all the discussions that went around there, but then missionaries went with the treaty to help explain. But one of the reasons is because the work of the mission was well known to Maori throughout the North and South Island. Well, he was there at Waimate when Hobson sends him a message on the 30th of January to come and visit him, which he does. 30th of January is also when Colenso prints off the invitation to chiefs to come and gather at Waitangi for the proposal of a treaty. It was not until the 4th of February. Now, Waitangi Day in 1840 was a Thursday. So the 4th of February is Tuesday. So Tuesday at 4 p.m, Henry Williams is given an English text to translate into Maori. And that had been developed by a number of people, Busby and Hobson, and there's all discussion about that. Here it's given to Henry Williams. Apparently he had his son Edward helping him. His son Edward was 22 years old, but had grown up. He was born in 1818, so he was aged 5 when he arrived in New Zealand, but had essentially grown up speaking Maori, was very fluent. He went on to become a government interpreter, actually, for Hobson, and in fact, I didn't know, he translated God Save the Queen into Maori in 1860. That's quite a subversive thing to do in 1860. And he died in 1909, aged 91. So all those Williamses, they all lived a long time. But you see, the whole of the 19th century, as well as these forces that are pulling New Zealand society apart, just like Henry Williams was the glue between the English text and the Maori text, so too the missionary families, particularly the Williams families, Henry Williams and of William Williams, became the glue within society, living alongside Maori and brokering the cultural exchanges and such like within colonial society in the 19th century. We kind of see it as this sort of polarized interests all competing with one another. But actually, there were a lot of people who had good understanding and goodwill. So here's Henry Williams and his son Edward, 4 p.m. on the Tuesday. They are to translate this text into Maori. I just say that because this is not go away for 2 months and carefully plan it. This is done in the moment. And he's drawing all his experience as being a translator. He had, of course, he was immersed in the language. They were speaking Maori at home because they had the Maori servants there. Now, presumably they would have some English, but even in the house, Maori was heard and spoken. And not only were they immersed in the language, but they actually intentionally studied the language so that they might translate it. You don't really know a language till you have to translate into it. And they did that with the older Maori who are living and working on the mission station. So in a sense, what we would say today is language helpers were there as well. He was immersed in the language. He had studied it in detail. He was also, as I've mentioned, that statesman who had been involved in many situations of negotiating between tribes and bringing about peace between tribes. So for those who are saying that he wasn't a competent translator, when you take that bundle of abilities, together, that bundle of skills, I cannot think of a person that is better than Henry Williams to have been the one who translated that treaty into Maori. People say, William Paki or William Williams, his brother, and others, and well, maybe they have a technical facility of the language, but they had nothing of the statesmanship that Henry Williams had. And so he was a man of character. He was competent to translate. This is how he said about the task. This is what he said about his own translation. In this translation, it was necessary to avoid all expressions of the English for which there is no expressive term in the Maori, preserving entirely the spirit and tenor of the treaty, which, though severely tested, has never yet been disturbed, notwithstanding that many in power have endeavoured to do so. So he's saying it's what we might call dynamic equivalence. He's not trying to do a wooden literal. That would be a completely inappropriate way of trying to translate that treaty. I fully agree with Henry Williams. Do you avoid all expressions of the English for which there is no expressive term in Maori, preserving entirely the spirit and tenor of the treaty, which has been severely tested. And he's speaking of the way during the 1840s people in power, meaning Pākehā, Europeans, have tried to twist it and disturb it. So that's Henry Williams as a translator. Well, what about his interpretation of the treaty? How did he explain it to Maori? Well, after the 4th, on the 5th of February, Maori were gathered at Waitangi to hear this treaty and to debate it. And Henry Williams was the key translator between Hobson and the Maori chiefs that had gathered. Hobson spoke and gave his address to the gathering, and Henry Williams translated it for people. And then Hobson asked Henry Williams to read the treaty. So he then read it out in Maori. Then Henry Williams explained the treaty. And then what followed was 6 hours of speeches. But this is how Henry Williams described it. In the midst of profound silence, I read the treaty to all assembled. I told all to listen with care, explaining clause by clause to the chiefs, giving them caution not to be in a hurry, but telling them that we, the missionaries, fully approved of the treaty, that it was an act of love towards them on the part of the Queen, who desired to secure to them their property, rights and privileges, that this treaty was a fortress for them against any foreign power which might desire to take possession of their country, as the French had taken possession of Otaheite, which is Tahiti. There were 6 hours of speeches. This is or so, and William Colenso records in his notes a number of the speeches, but not all of them. Because his notes don't go for 6 hours. I was interested in a comment made by one of Hobson's entourage, Felton Matthew, who was the acting Surveyor General for the new colony. He said, during the whole ceremony with the chiefs, nothing was more remarkable than the very apt and pertinent questions which they asked on the subject of the treaty, and the stipulations they made for the preservation of their liberty and perfect independence. So you hear that actually this was quite a thorough, according to Henry Williams, a thorough clause-by-clause explanation of the treaty. While they gathered, at the end of the gathering, they retired. The Maori chiefs retired to what is now Te Marae, that area of land, to hold discussions. And Henry Williams said that many came to us to speak upon this new state of affairs. We gave them but one version, explaining clause by clause, showing the advantage to them of being taken under the fostering care of the British government, by which act they would become one people with the English, in the suppression of wars and of every lawless act, under one sovereign and one law, human and divine. So when you say, what did Henry Williams think he was explaining to Maori? Well, he's got his own testimony there. It's quite interesting, isn't it? One sovereign and one law, human and divine. In Henry Williams's mind, the British rule was only as good as it reflected the divine rule. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as in heaven. It's the one, and as you'll know from last year when I spoke about the treaty and the kāwanatanga and rangatiratanga and why he might have chosen those words. For Henry Williams, the mana belongs to Christ, the one from whom all law comes. And the idea that two people might become one with the English. That's quite remarkable, really. And it reflects Ephesians chapter 2, but it also reflects Galatians chapter 3, doesn't it, on the front of our newsletter. And it's good to refer to the Bible at some stage during a history talk. And there is neither Jew nor Greek. There is neither slave nor free. There is no male or female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. When the Gentiles, the Greeks, became Christians, the great debate we see in Acts 15 was, Do Greeks have to become Jews in order to become Christians? Do you have to become Jewish before you come to Christ? To translate that question into 1840 context, do Maori have to become English before they become Christian? And one of the assumptions of the modern theory of colonisation and colonialism is that somehow Maori in converting were becoming victors of the colonising power of the English. But actually that is not the evidence from the 19th century either. The King movement, for instance, wasn't very English, but it was thoroughly Christian in its approach to confronting the political realities of their day. Now, we may not agree with them, or we may agree with them, but it wasn't the result of colonisation. You see, when you become a Christian, you don't leave your culture behind. It's to become a Christian, to be converted, is not to become a proselyte. For a Greek to become a Jew would become a proselyte, to become just like the ones who converted you. But when you become converted, it's not a proselyte, but there's a family resemblance. But you come to Christ as Greek. You come to Christ as Maori. And your culture needs to be redeemed too. As we come to Christ, and it's not an instantaneous thing, is it? Some things we need to let go. Some things we can carry forward with us. Other things are modified and change. It's part of the conversion process. In fact, it spreads out because our society needs to be converted as we come to Christ, the family groupings we live in. And you see the social and economic realities of Maori life were changed through conversion. Before I get onto another topic, I better come back here. One sovereign, one law, human and divine. It doesn't mean that Maori become proselytes or brown-skinned Englishmen. They are still thoroughly Maori. Well, did Maori understand what Henry Williams is saying to them? Well, Henry Williams believed so. But around the Bay of Islands were other voices who took a very different view. There were American voices and there were French voices. Now, I just mention that because Henry Williams had fought battles against both the French and the Americans. And here they are in the Bay of Islands saying to Maori, don't sign the treaty because you'll become slaves. You'll become tau reka reka, like the convicts in New South Wales. You need to throw off the tyranny of British rule, as we Americans have done. Now, they were right through the 1840s. And it was interesting that there was probably about 200 Maori chiefs gathered there at Waitangi with others outside, but also about 200 Europeans. It's quite a bicultural gathering, so to speak. And many of those European voices were very antagonistic to any idea of British law being brought to inhibit what they wanted to do. And the Americans brought an ideology that they had thrown off the tyranny of British rule. Why would Maori want to sign that and come under their sovereign, under British sovereignty? Now, Bishop Pompallier, representing the Catholic Church, wasn't speaking on behalf of France, and France was there was a fear of what France might do in New Zealand, which lies back. The reality of that was probably not quite such an imminent threat at this time. But it was thought by Henry Williams and other missionaries that the bishop was reluctant to let those under his influence sign that treaty. The real test came in January 1845, the 28th of January. In fact, it went for 3 or 4 days. A conference, a hui, that was held at Pāroa, which is, you go across the Russell and you go over further out towards the heads of the Bay of Islands. That's a bay. Maori gathered there to take counsel together. Because of a number of things that happened, there were legitimate concerns that actually they had been betrayed by this treaty. that their land was being taken from them. And this became an ongoing issue because the more moderate Maori were being actually realised perhaps we should be siding with the more radical Maori like Honi Hiki, who is saying that the treaty is all soap, it's all slimy and oily, and it says whatever the European wants it to say. Because from England news came that they wanted to say, oh yes, the British Crown will protect Maori possession of their land. But what does possession mean? You can't possess what you're not cultivating. Therefore, invoking a kind of a feudal law, any wasteland will revert to the Crown. Well, this galvanised Maori to say, do we need to kick them all out? And John Hiki, had been chopping the flagpoles down, as you know. And here in January 1845, they gathered to take a council of war. Not just the more radical ones, Kawati and Honi Hiki, but also Ururoa from Whangaroa and Wakanini, who had been the key supporter of the treaty. They all gathered in a council of war. Henry Williams printed off 400 copies of the treaty in Maori and went and joined that meeting. And this is what he said. Both Wakanini and Rewa at this meeting observed that the evils which threatened them arose from their having signed the Treaty of Waitangi. The Treaty of Waitangi was the only argument I used on the occasion. This I read clause by clause, requesting the chiefs to notice any expression which favoured the assertion that their interests had been betrayed by the government, or that there had been any design to deprive them of their just rights. It may be safely asserted that had it not been for the reaction produced at this meeting, the greater number of the friendly chiefs, together with those who adopted a neutral course, would have been arrayed against the government. It's here's Henry Williams standing on the text of the treaty, speaking to people who signed it in 1840 when he explained it, and here he's going again saying, okay, there's been 5 years since. You show me where you've been deprived of your just rights. Going through clause by clause, noticing any expression that might favour that assertion. And here he was able to, in a sense, break the coalition that Honi Hiki was trying to form. So in my view, the Northern War was lost before it began. I think that in the north at that stage, I think there was 1 magistrate and 2 constables, and the potential of 2,000 armed and trained warriors. And there was no way that even in Auckland that they would have been able to withstand such an attack. But here, not only did Henry Williams was able to convince them that actually the cause, Honi Hiki's cause, was not just. Many stayed neutral and didn't join with him. Others, like Wakanini, saw it as a matter of honour that they side and ally with the British Crown. And so you actually had Maori fighting alongside the British troops in order to bring law and order to bear. Henry Williams wrote to Bishop Selwyn, I have had a singular battle to fight, for I know not what other term to use, and as a matter of course have been accused of aiding and abetting these turbulent feelings, and had been well nigh cut down for having taken the part I did relative to the treaty in 1840. The natives having been perpetually told that I had betrayed them in that act. I was necessitated, therefore, to fall back upon the treaty, and by explaining and distributing several copies among the chiefs, maintained my ground and the honour of the Queen, all acknowledging that the terms of the treaty were good and honest. But for the timely distribution of the treaty, I hesitate not to say that the native population, to a man, would have been in arms. And then, Henry Williams came through this, in a sense, saving the New Zealand colony and saving many lives through his actions. Yet, no thanks was received by any of the settlers who, as I said, would rather have him hung as a traitor. Well, Henry Williams, is he a dope or a duper? I've just wanted to allow his voice to be heard. I've read chunks of what he wrote about what he did when he translated and when he explained. And I think it's an important voice to hear, particularly those who want to, for various reasons, divide the English and the Maori text. Because to do so, you must tear this man in half. And it's been tried before, down through New Zealand history, but I think that his testimony still stands strong today. Henry Williams believed in the integrity of his translation and his explanation. He called it the Magna Carta of New Zealand Maori, the Magna Carta of the Aboriginals of New Zealand. The Magna Carta from 1215 is where we have enshrined in our law. I think there's only 4 clauses of the Magna Carta, of its 65 clauses, that remain in British law and in New Zealand law. And one particular is the habeas corpus. That is, you cannot be imprisoned without trial, that you have the right to be judged by a jury of your peers. It goes back to the Magna Carta. Many of the other feudal things are totally irrelevant. I think it's quite a good analogy for the treaty, isn't it? Actually, when you look at the treaty for its context and its time, it can't stay static, can it? The terms there have to be debated, and have been. Particularly, initially, the right of preemption from the government was a whole source of misunderstanding and such like, and confusion. And what Earl Grey wanted to do with wasteland and such like caused such mischief in New Zealand. And Henry Williams saw it as a matter of honour to defend the treaty. Feeling as I did that the terms of the treaty were a sacred compact, says Henry Williams, between the British government and the chiefs of New Zealand, I was enabled to speak with confidence as to the integrity and honour of England, that it was impossible that the Queen or the Governor could admit of any deceit towards them. He had made a commitment to Maori that if it's ever otherwise, he would tell them. And he was, in a sense, challenging that the Governor Grey, not Earl Grey or Lord Grey, who's in the Colonial Office in England, but Governor Grey, who was sympathetic to the Colonial Office, he was challenging him that he, as a missionary, would come out and tell Maori that they've been betrayed. To allow the natives to continue in ignorance appears to me he tino mea kohuru, a thing most treacherous. Thanks, River.